That's the scenario. Education's got to play a role in changing that. And we can't afford to wait until we elect the right person as president or governor, because the fact is, we have a bipartisan problem in education. The Democrats have been no better. They've come up with the saying, race for the top was a disaster. There was no child behind on steroids. And so what we need is to make sure that we focus on equity, that we really focus on using assessment to help our children develop language proficiency in both languages or more. Because children need their primary language, don't they? We need to make sure that we are not dumbing down the curriculum for those we think don't have the potential because of some measure of their ability, which is typically what we do, isn't it? We not only dumb down the curriculum, but we also sort the teachers. We save the so-called best teachers for which kids? The ones we think are the most advanced, and we said the newest teachers, the least experienced teachers for kids with the greatest needs. Show me the research to support that strategy. There is none. We confuse the performance of our kids on standardized tests with their actual ability. We didn't even know if the kids actually made an effort. We didn't even know if they knew how to type when they're typing in their answers. We don't know what the scores mean. But we treat the score as though it actually tells us something about a child's ability and potential. Because we are using the assessments in the wrong ways. And so we're going to have to make sure that we make high standards available to all children, and we give teachers clear guidance and support on how to do the work. We shouldn't send teachers into the classroom like Superintendent Gundry was sent, with no guidance, no support. Say, teach these kids. That's exactly what we're doing in many of these schools. And we shouldn't be surprised that we end up with long-term L's. You know about the long-term L's, the kids who never learn English and then lose their language, their primary language too? So now they end up semi-literate in 2 languages. That's a disability. That's a serious disability. So we've got to focus on how do we get more trained teachers? How do we start to build capacity in schools? The capacity building is the framework for the largest urban district in North America that's made the most progress in serving the needs of immigrant children and poor children. You know what district that is? It's Toronto. Toronto. They're not afraid of speaking another language in Toronto. They think it's a good idea. So they don't wait till high school. They start early. In Toronto, they don't think poverty is a learning disability, so they make sure there are resources in place so that teachers don't have to be social workers and psychologists. They bring in social workers and psychologists to work with children. If a school is struggling in Toronto, they can actually call on the Ministry of Education for help, and they show up not to scrutinize, not to pressure, not to threaten, but to help, to problem solve. Every county office of education should be focused on collaborative problem solving with the districts to help them figure out how to do the work. We can't wait for the state to figure it out. You know, I'd like to point out that Toronto made its progress under a crack-smoking mayor. He just died, rest in peace. But imagine if they had a sober mayor, what they could have done. I mean, if you can do it in Toronto, you can do it in California too. And so we need to make sure that we are not continuing to allow the distortions created by the past few years to continue to show up in our schools. You know what happens when you give a teacher a script? You drive out your best teachers. Because your best teachers didn't go into the profession to be told what page to be on. They go into the profession to make a difference, to use education to inspire, to motivate, to engage kids. That's what we should be focused on. Not the low-level testable skills. Skills that now are showing us that large numbers of our kids who pass the test are actually not prepared for college. That's why they're taking so many remedial courses. We need to make sure that we don't use tests simply to measure and monitor, but we find ways to provide support to kids in their language. And that's why we need a framework for how to do it. And the framework for pursuing equity really draws on things we've known for years, such as the fact that children develop at a different pace. Even within the same family, even identical twins. They don't do things identically. My first son walked at 9 months. I was very proud, as if I had something to do with it. The fourth one didn't walk till 15 months. I was concerned. She was crawling very well. I thought she'd crawl forever. They're all walking fine now, though. They're all over. Just because you don't achieve average yearly progress at walking, or talking, or reading, doesn't mean there's a disability. It just means there's a spectrum. We do need to make sure that all children are achieving progress, that they're moving forward. But we need to understand that their journey may not all be the same. Right? The pathway for them may not all look the same. And child development reminds us of that. The neuroscience is coming out now, the neuroscientific research is telling us, this idea of measuring ability and making early judgments of children is completely at odds with the way the brain develops. Because the brain develops through stimulation. The brain develops through relationships, through experiences. It's elastic, it's like a muscle. It has to be worked, which is why all children need quality early childhood education. Learning experiences that stimulate the mind through play, not through regimentation. Right? The inequities we're creating now between what we give the poor children in early childhood and what the middle class and affluent are getting are striking. Visit the preschools, and you'll see it. All children have to be stimulated and encouraged and given the ability to explore. And then finally, we've got to understand what's happening in their lives outside of school, what's happening in the community, what's happening in the family. Many of our immigrant kids are not even living with their families. They're in transnational family. Mommy and papi said across the border, they're here living with relatives. We need to understand the context, especially if we're going to build strong partnerships with families, and we must build partnerships with families. Because the families are the first teachers. And we need the families to be the advocates for the children. So we need to understand what's happening outside of school. And we need to understand it because the more we know about how our children learn, the more we'll know about how to teach them. Right now, in too many of our schools, we expect the children to learn the way we teach. And if they can't do it, we blame them. If you're ready for it, Cabe, go out there and start teaching the children the way they learn. Think about the difference. How many of you have children at home that play video games? Anybody have a child who's a gamer? Lots of gamers out there. May I have some gamers in the audience today? How does a child learn to play a video game? Did they get direct instruction? Or do they get on there and start playing? Learn by doing. How often do our kids get to learn by doing? If they struggle with that game, they might get on the phone and ask for help. We call that cheating. Our kids learn through collaboration. When they're learning the game, they make mistakes, don't they? Sometimes they die, have to start over. Are our classrooms safe for learning through your mistakes? Are mistakes seen as a part of the learning process? And the longer they play the game, what happens? They get better. They get better. They rise to a higher level. They master the game. How many of our children get to experience mastery in school? How many of our children can say, I mastered the times tables. I'm ready for long division. I mastered the decimals and percentages. I'm ready for algebra. You know what happens when you don't master things? You get pushed along with a weak foundation. And you can't do more advanced work because you don't have the foundation for it. If we teach the way our children learn, we teach differently. Now I'm going to give you some examples of how that's happening. Examples of schools that are helping kids to utilize their higher order thinking skills, that allow them to trans-language. Ofelia Garcia writes about trans-languaging. You know what? That's how you actually learn a language. You use your primary language to acquire the second language. That's what the brain is doing all the time. The opportunity to learn and do complex tasks and to do challenging texts. What are your children reading right now? Is it something that will make them want to keep reading after school? Keep reading in the summertime? That's what it should do, right? How many of you are avid readers? Anybody here an avid reader? How many of your children are avid readers? Okay, I'm glad to see some hands. My father, who did not graduate from high school, neither did my mother. They managed to send all 6 of us to college, top college in the country. He used to tell us, you get a free education with a library card. But most people don't practice it. So we insisted that we did. So on Saturdays, after the chores, my mother would send us to the library, as if that was a daycare center. Fortunately for us, there was a Panamanian librarian named Miss McDonald who was there to greet us, and she would take time with each one of us to find out what we were interested in, and then recommend a book. In 4th grade, she recommended to me A Wrinkle in Time. Yeah, anybody who's read it says, yeah, that's a good one. I became an avid reader right then. What makes kids want to read? Good literature. What are your children reading? Are they reading literature about themselves, about their culture, about their history, so they can make sense of who they are? Are they learning about other cultures? Because that's got to be part of the experience too. My daughter, who struggled with reading till 9th grade, when she had a very patient, thoughtful teacher. We're riding the subway one day from Washington Heights downtown, and she's reading a book while we're taking the train. I see her crying. I said, what's wrong? She said, this book is so sad. I said, well, stop reading it. She said, I can't stop. I said, why not? She says, it's too good. I said, what are you reading? She says, The Kite Runner. Oh, no wonder. And then she continued to tell me about it. We're both crying on the way down. I hadn't even read the book. It's so sad. What are we reading, and what to our kids, and what are we having them read? Are we giving them the skills they really need for college? Skills like the ability to do independent research. Skills like the ability to critique what they read and see in the media, so they're not passively accepting everything thrown at them. Skills that allow them to produce high-quality work and demonstrate mastery. Demonstrate it. Produce it. We've got to demand more if we want our kids to be able to produce more. The Common Core calls for this, and if we took the time to understand the opportunities it creates, we would see that these skills that require kids to be able to apply ideas and engage in more complex texts, that encourage them to be able to systematically acquire knowledge in literature and other disciplines, and develop a broad array of literacy skills, and that, in fact, give teachers the ability to choose what kinds of texts and what kinds of assignments. Because this is not a mandated curriculum, at least not from the federal government. It might be in your district, but that's your district's problem. Still allows lots of flexibility to meet the needs of our children. Here's what's possible when you do it right. Brockton High School. Brockton High School is the largest high school in the state of Massachusetts. 4,200 students. Massachusetts is the top performing state in the country. For 6 years in a row, over 1/3 of the senior class at Brockton High School has gotten the highest possible score on the state exam, which gives them a free scholarship at any public university. And you know what's impressive about that? 70% of those kids were English language learners. 100% of those kids. 100% low income. Brockton is the only urban high school in the state gets a level 1 rating by the state. It's a poor, working class community. It's known for fighting. That's what it's known for. You Google, you'll find out they had a brawl at their last graduation. Rocky Marciano, the boxer, came from Brockton, so there's a boxer out front. They like to fight in Brockton, but they also like to write in Brockton. That's what they do. Because the secret to their success is what? Literacy across the curriculum. Every teacher, regardless of what they teach, is a teacher of literacy. The science teacher, the math teacher, the art teacher, the PE teacher even trained on how to meet